Seoul had taught Han Seo-jin one lesson very early in life. People rarely cared how much pain you carried, they only cared whether you still looked successful. At 29, Seo-jin had everything people associated with a perfect life. A luxury apartment overlooking the Han River. A successful fashion company bearing her family name. Designer clothes. Expensive cars. Invitations to exclusive events. And a surname powerful enough to open almost any door in Seoul. Yet every morning, when the elevator doors closed behind her, and she was finally alone, she felt exhausted. Her father had built Hanseong Atelier into one of Korea's most respected fashion houses. Now that he was preparing to retire, the company's board expected his only daughter to take his place. But there was one problem. They didn't believe she was ready. Not because she lacked intelligence. Not because she lacked talent. But because the board saw her as someone who had inherited a beautiful life rather than earned it. And lately, her family's concerns had become more personal. At every dinner, the same questions followed her. Was she seeing anyone? When would she settle down? Why was she always alone? To the board, her unmarried status had somehow become evidence of emotional instability. Then came the announcement that changed everything. The company's largest international investor would visit Seoul in 3 weeks. And Seo-jin's father had decided that the investor's final decision would determine whether she became the next CEO. That same evening, across the city, Park Min-jae sat inside a nearly empty independent cinema in Hongdae. He was 31. Quiet. Intelligent. And almost completely unknown. His documentary studio was drowning in debt. His latest film had won praise at small festivals but earned almost nothing. The landlord had already given him a final warning. His dream was disappearing one unpaid bill at a time. Then his phone rang. A woman he had never met was asking for him. She wanted to make him an offer. An offer so strange. He initially thought it was a joke. But it wasn't. Because by the following evening, Min-jae would sit across from Han Seo-jin in one of Seoul's most expensive restaurants. And she would ask him to pretend to be her boyfriend. Not for a day. Not for a weekend. For 3 months. And she was prepared to pay him enough money to save everything he had spent his life building. Neither of them understood that the arrangement they were entering for money would eventually cost them something money couldn't replace. The restaurant was almost silent when Han Seo-jin arrived. She had chosen the private dining room deliberately. No cameras. No curious eyes. No chance of anyone recognizing the conversation that was about to take place. Across the table sat Park Min-jae. He looked nothing like the men who normally surrounded her. His dark hair was slightly untidy. His black jacket had clearly been worn more times than he could afford to admit. There was no expensive watch on his wrist. No designer shoes. No attempt to impress her. And strangely, that was exactly what made her trust him. Seo-jin placed a slim black folder on the table. Inside was a contract. Min-jae stared at it. Then at her. She calmly explained the arrangement. For 3 months, he would accompany her to selected events, dinners, business gatherings, and family occasions. They would present themselves as a couple. Nothing more. No physical relationship. No private expectations. No emotional involvement. Just an agreement. In exchange, he would receive enough money to clear his studio's debts and finance his next documentary. Min-jae almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. A wealthy woman he'd never met was offering him a fortune to pretend to love her. But then Seo-jin said something that stopped him. If you refuse, I'll understand. There was no arrogance in her voice. Only desperation. For the first time, Min-jae looked carefully at the woman sitting opposite him. She didn't look like someone buying affection. She looked like someone terrified of being judged. He asked why she couldn't simply hire an actor. Seo-jin lowered her eyes. Because actors know how to perform. She paused. I need someone who doesn't. That answer stayed with him. Still, he refused. He walked out of the restaurant believing he had made the right decision. Until he returned to his studio that night. The electricity had been disconnected. His editing equipment sat in darkness. A final eviction notice was taped to the door. Min-jae stood there for several seconds, staring at the life he had spent 10 years building. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Seo-jin. Only 4 words. The offer still stands. He closed his eyes. 4 years, he had protected his pride. But pride couldn't pay his employees. Pride couldn't save his studio. And pride couldn't finish the film he had promised his late mother he would complete. The next morning, Min-jae called Seo-jin. I'll do it. Neither of them realized that 4 words would begin the most complicated performance of their lives. 3 days later, Park Min-jae stood outside Hanseong Atelier, wearing the most expensive suit he had ever borrowed. It didn't belong to him. Neither did the polished shoes. But for the first time in his life, people looked at him differently. The security guard greeted him with a respectful bow. The receptionist immediately stood. Employees whispered as he walked through the marble lobby beside Seo-jin. Only a week earlier, nobody in that building knew his name. Now, everyone believed he was the man who had captured the heart of Hanseong Atelier's future CEO. Seo-jin noticed the reactions. She didn't smile. Instead, she quietly explained the rules. Never contradict her in public. Never reveal the arrangement. Never disappear without telling her. And above everything else, never allow anyone to believe the relationship was fake. Min-jae nodded. He understood. But what Seo-jin hadn't told him was that pretending to be her boyfriend would be much harder than simply standing beside her. That evening, she took him to a private family dinner in Cheongdam-dong. Her father sat at the head of the table. Beside him were several senior executives and relatives who had spent years questioning Seo-jin's ability to lead the company. The moment Min-jae entered, the atmosphere changed. Everyone looked at him. His background was discussed discreetly. His career, his finances, his family, his education. They were trying to determine whether he belonged beside Seo-jin. Min-jae remained calm. Then one executive made a careless remark about his small documentary studio. He implied that Seo-jin had probably chosen a struggling artist because she felt sorry for him. The table became silent. Seo-jin's expression hardened. But before she could respond, Min-jae smiled. Not angrily. Not defensively. He simply explained that a person's bank account could measure wealth. But it couldn't measure courage. Then he turned the conversation toward the executive's own career. Within minutes, the man who had attempted to embarrass him was defending his own decisions instead. Seo-jin watched quietly. She had expected Min-jae to follow instructions. She hadn't expected him to possess confidence she couldn't buy. When dinner ended, they stepped outside into the cool Seoul night. Seo-jin looked at him differently. For the first time, she wasn't seeing the man she had hired. She was seeing the man underneath the contract. And that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Because the arrangement had one rule neither of them had written down. Don't start becoming real. The first month of the arrangement passed almost perfectly. At least, that was what Seo-jin told herself. Min-jae learned how to move through Seal's elite circles without looking intimidated. He learned which executives preferred silence. Which journalists asked dangerous questions. Which family members smiled while quietly hoping Seo-jin would fail. And Seo-jin learned things about him too. He didn't drink. He hated luxury hotels. He carried a battered camera everywhere. And whenever he saw someone working late, he always stopped to help. That last habit irritated her. Not because it was wrong. Because she couldn't understand why someone who had so little would constantly give pieces of himself away. One evening, after an exhausting corporate event in Apjeong, they returned to Seo-jin's apartment. For the first time, there were no cameras, no executives, no family, no audience. Just the two of them. Min-jae removed his borrowed jacket and carefully placed it over a chair. Seo-jin watched him. "You don't have to pretend when we're alone," she said. He looked at her. "I know. Then why are you still acting?" He smiled. "I'm not." The answer unsettled her. She turned away. Later that night, Seo-jin discovered him sitting on her balcony with his camera. He was photographing the city. Not the luxury buildings. Not the river. A lone street vendor closing his tiny food stall beneath a glowing street lamp. Seo-jin asked why. Min-jae explained that he liked photographing people when they didn't know anyone was watching. Because that's when people looked most like themselves. She stood beside him. For several minutes. Neither spoke. The city glittered beneath them. And for the first time since their arrangement began, Seo-jin felt completely comfortable around someone. Not impressed. Not judged. Not evaluated. Just seen. Then Min-jae turned toward her. Their eyes met. The moment lasted only a few seconds. But it was enough. Seo-jin stepped away first. She reminded herself of the contract. 3 months. A performance. Nothing more. Yet when she went to bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her. And across the apartment, Min-jae sat awake beside the window. He was thinking about her too. Neither knew it yet. But their carefully constructed fake relationship had already begun becoming something neither contract could control. By the beginning of the second month, the arrangement had become almost too convincing. People no longer questioned whether Seo-jin and Min-jae were together. They simply accepted it. At the Hanseong Atelier charity gala in Jamsil, photographers surrounded them the moment they stepped from the car. Seo-jin instinctively reached for Min-jae's arm. He leaned closer. The cameras flashed. For everyone watching. They looked perfect. But somewhere between the first photograph and the 100th, neither of them remembered they were pretending. Inside the ballroom, Min-jae noticed Seo-jin becoming uncomfortable as several executives surrounded her. He quietly moved beside her. He didn't say anything. He simply stayed. That small gesture calmed her. Later, when the music began, one of the senior board members jokingly demanded that the couple dance. Seo-jin hesitated. Min-jae extended his hand. She placed hers in his. They stepped onto the dance floor. At first, both were careful. Measured. Performing. Then the music softened. Min-jae's hand rested gently at her waist. Seo-jin looked up at him. For several seconds. The ballroom disappeared. There were no executives. No contract. No cameras. Only two people standing impossibly close. Seo-jin's heart began beating faster. Min-jae noticed. He whispered that they could stop. She shook her head. Don't. The song ended. Neither moved immediately. Then applause broke the moment. They stepped apart. That night, a photograph of them dancing appeared online. The caption described them as Seal's newest power couple. Seo-jin stared at the picture from her bedroom. She should have been worried about the rumors. Instead, she kept looking at Min-jae's expression. He wasn't acting. Neither was she. And that realization frightened her. The next morning, Seo-jin received a message from an unknown number. There was only one sentence. You should know who the man you're pretending to love really is. Attached was a photograph. Min-jae. Standing beside another woman. Seo-jin stared at the image. Her stomach tightened. For the first time, she wondered whether she had been the one being deceived all along. Seo-jin stared at the photograph for almost a minute. Min-jae was standing outside a small cafe. Beside him was a woman she had never seen before. The woman's hand rested lightly on his arm. They looked comfortable. Familiar. Too familiar. Seo-jin zoomed in on the image. She hated herself for doing it. The contract had been clear. Min-jae owed her his time. Nothing more. He was free to have a private life. So why did the photograph hurt? She locked her phone. Then unlocked it again. The image was still there. By lunchtime, she had convinced herself she didn't care. By evening, she had asked her assistant to find out who the woman was. Her name was Min-jae, a documentary producer. And, according to public records, someone who had worked with Min-jae for almost 5 years. Seo-jin felt foolish. There was probably an innocent explanation. But instead of asking him, she waited. That night, Min-jae returned later than usual. He immediately noticed the change in her expression. Something happened. Seo-jin looked at him. She wanted to ask. She wanted to accuse him. But something inside her refused to become the jealous woman she had promised herself she would never be. So she simply said she was tired. Min-jae didn't believe her. The next morning, he received an urgent call. His documentary had been accepted into a prestigious international film festival in Busan. It was the opportunity he had been waiting years for. But there was a problem. The festival wanted him to attend with the film's original producer, Min-jae. Min-jae immediately thought of Seo-jin. He knew exactly how the situation would look. He went to her office. But before he could explain, Seo-jin told him she had already seen the photograph. His face changed. Not because he was guilty. Because he was hurt that she hadn't trusted him enough to ask. He explained that Min-jae had been his closest professional partner for years. Nothing more. Seo-jin lowered her eyes. She apologized. But Min-jae didn't leave. Instead, he asked her one question. Why did it bother you? She couldn't answer. Because the truth was becoming impossible to hide. She wasn't afraid of losing the arrangement. She was afraid of losing him. And that was something the contract had never prepared her for. The argument ended without either of them raising their voice. That somehow made it worse. Min-jae stood near the office door, waiting. Seo-jin remained beside her desk, staring at the rain outside. Neither knew what to say next. Finally, Min-jae walked toward her. You don't have to explain yourself, he said quietly. Seo-jin looked at him. But I need to know something. He stopped. Do you actually want this arrangement to continue? Her heart tightened. The question wasn't about the contract. She knew that. 4 weeks, they had been pretending to be lovers for everyone else. But somewhere along the way, they had started becoming something real when nobody was watching. Seo-jin slowly shook her head. I don't know how to do this anymore. Min-jae's expression softened. Neither do I. For a moment, they simply stood there. Then Seo-jin whispered the truth she had been avoiding. I'm jealous. Min-jae smiled faintly. I know. She looked embarrassed. I don't like feeling this way. I know that too. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch her. Just enough for her to feel his presence. Then tell me to leave. She looked into his eyes. She couldn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was hesitant. Almost uncertain. A brief touch that could have ended immediately. But neither stepped away. The second kiss was different. It carried everything they had refused to say. Every late-night conversation. Every quiet glance. Every moment they had pretended not to care. When they finally separated, Seo-jin's eyes were filled with tears. Not sadness. Fear. Because now there was no pretending. Whatever happened next, they were no longer simply playing a role. That evening, Min-jae returned to his studio. He opened his laptop and stared at the film he had been struggling to finish. For the first time in months, he felt inspired. Across Seoul, Seo-jin stood before her bedroom mirror. She removed the expensive necklace she had worn to work, then smiled at her reflection. She had spent years believing love was something that made powerful people vulnerable. Now she was beginning to understand something else. Love didn't make her weak. It simply gave her something she could finally lose. And that frightened her more than anything. For the next few days, everything felt different. There was no announcement. No conversation defining what they had become. But the way Seo-jin looked at Min-jae had changed. And so had the way he looked at her. Their fake relationship was no longer a performance when they were alone. That should have made them happy. Instead, it made everything more complicated. At Hanseong Atelier, Seo-jin's father noticed the change immediately. He had watched his daughter for years. He knew when she was pretending. And now, she wasn't. One evening, he asked her to meet him privately at the company headquarters. He placed a file on the desk. Inside were photographs of Min-jae, his documentary studio, his financial problems, his previous business failures. Everything. Seo-jin's face tightened. Her father wasn't accusing Min-jae of anything. He was warning her. People don't enter powerful families without wanting something. Seo-jin pushed the file away. He never asked me for anything. Her father looked at her carefully. That's what worries me. She didn't understand. Until he revealed something else. The international investor visiting Seoul had been conducting a background review of everyone connected to the company. And Min-jae's sudden appearance beside Seo-jin had attracted attention. If the relationship turned into a scandal, her position as future CEO could be destroyed. Seo-jin left the office furious. She called Min-jae. He answered immediately. She told him everything. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he asked one question. Do you believe I'm using you? Her answer came instantly. No. But there was something else in her voice. Fear. Min-jae understood. He told her he would step away. Not because he wanted to. Because he refused to become the reason she lost everything. Seo-jin panicked. She told him she didn't want him to leave. And that was when Min-jae finally said the words neither of them had dared to say. I stopped pretending a long time ago. Silence. Seo-jin closed her eyes. So did he. They both knew what that meant. The contract had become meaningless. But before they could decide what their real relationship would become, a photograph appeared online the following morning. It showed Min-jae leaving Seo-jin's apartment late at night. The headline was already spreading across Korean business media. Hanseong heiress's mystery boyfriend, love or business deal. Their secret arrangement was no longer a secret. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. Business websites, entertainment channels, social media. Even people who had never heard of Hanseong Atelier were suddenly discussing Seo-jin's private life. The photograph of Min-jae leaving her apartment appeared beside headlines questioning his intentions. Some called him a gold digger. Others accused Seo-jin of using a struggling filmmaker to improve her public image. Within hours, the story had become bigger than either of them. At Hanseong Atelier, reporters gathered outside the headquarters. Board members demanded answers. Investors began calling. Seo-jin's father ordered the communications team to deny everything. But Seo-jin refused. She stood in front of the cameras herself. Her hands trembled slightly. Yet her voice remained calm. She admitted that Min-jae was the man she had been seeing. She refused to discuss their private life. Then one reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered. Did you begin dating him because of his financial situation? Seo-jin looked directly into the cameras. No. Another reporter shouted. Then why would a successful woman like you choose a struggling filmmaker? Seo-jin paused. Because there were 100 answers she could have given. But only one was true. Because he sees me as a person before he sees my surname. The room went silent. Across Seoul, Min-jae watched the interview from his tiny studio. He couldn't believe what she had done. She had protected him, even though doing so could damage her own reputation. That afternoon, he went to Hanseong Atelier. When Seo-jin saw him waiting outside her office, she immediately knew something was wrong. He told her he couldn't continue. Not because he had stopped loving her. Because he had finally realized what staying beside her might cost. Seo-jin's eyes filled with tears. You think leaving will protect me? He didn't answer. She stepped closer. You are the only person in this entire city who has never asked me to become someone else. Her voice broke. Don't become another person who leaves because you think you know what's best for me. Min-jae looked at her. For the first time, he understood. She wasn't asking him to stay because of a contract. She was asking because she loved him. But before he could respond, Seo-jin's phone rang. It was her father. The board had called an emergency meeting. And they were preparing to remove her from the succession. The emergency board meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. When Seo-jin finally entered the conference room, 12 executives were already seated around the long glass table. Her father sat at the head. Nobody smiled. The chairman explained that the recent scandal had damaged the company's reputation. Several investors were reconsidering their commitments. The board believed Seo-jin's judgment had become compromised. One executive placed a document in front of her. A temporary suspension from all CEO succession activities. Seo-jin stared at it. She wasn't surprised. But she was hurt. Not because they doubted her. Because they had waited for an excuse to do it. She slowly pushed the document back. You don't trust me because I'm in love. Nobody answered. She continued. You trusted me when I worked 16-hour days. You trusted me when I increased our Asian market share. You trusted me when I brought in investors. But the moment I chose someone you don't consider worthy, suddenly, I became incompetent. The room went silent. Her father looked at her. For the first time, he didn't look like the chairman. He looked like her father. He quietly asked whether she was prepared to risk everything for Min-jae. Seo-jin answered without hesitation. I'm prepared to risk everything for the right to choose my own life. She stood. But before she could leave, the conference room doors opened. Min-jae walked inside. He wasn't supposed to be there. Seo-jin looked at him in disbelief. He placed a folder on the table. Inside were financial records from his documentary studio. Then came something unexpected. A contract termination. He had returned every payment Seo-jin had given him. Every one. He had also withdrawn from the arrangement completely. He looked at her father. I don't want her position. Then he looked at Seo-jin. I don't want her money. His voice remained calm. I only want her to be able to choose me without anyone believing she was bought. Seo-jin's eyes filled with tears. Min-jae walked toward the door. But Seo-jin stopped him. Don't. He turned. She crossed the room. And in front of the entire board, she took his hand. Not for the cameras. Not for investors. Not because of a contract. Because this time, there was nothing to pretend. The boardroom remained silent. Seo-jin was still holding Min-jae's hand. For the first time, she didn't care who was watching. Her father slowly stood. Everyone expected him to object. Instead, he asked Min-jae a question. Did you really return everything? Min-jae nodded. The entire amount. One of the executives immediately protested. But Seo-jin's father raised his hand. He wanted to hear the answer himself. Min-jae explained that, when he first accepted Seo-jin's offer, he had been desperate. His studio was failing. His employees were about to lose their jobs. He needed the money. He wasn't ashamed of that. But somewhere along the way, the arrangement stopped being about money. He had fallen in love with her. And once he realized that, he couldn't continue accepting payment for something his heart was giving freely. Seo-jin's eyes filled with tears. She whispered that she had been afraid he would leave the moment the contract ended. Min-jae looked at her. I almost did. She swallowed hard. Why didn't you? He smiled. Because I realized I would rather lose the contract than lose you. The room fell silent again. Then Seo-jin's father walked toward the window. For years, he had believed protecting his daughter meant controlling the circumstances around her. But watching her stand beside Min-jae, he finally understood the difference. Protection wasn't deciding who she should love. It was trusting her enough to make her own mistakes. He turned back toward the board. The succession review will continue. Several executives looked shocked. But, he added, it will be based on her leadership, not her relationship. Seo-jin stared at him. It was the first time her father had given her something she had wanted for years. Not approval. Trust. The meeting ended. Outside the boardroom, Seo-jin and Min-jae walked through the quiet corridor together. She stopped. You know we're no longer pretending. Min-jae smiled. I know. She looked at him. And I don't want to. Neither did he. This time. There was no contract between them. No payment. No audience. Just a choice. And they chose each other. The following morning, Seoul woke to a completely different story. The headlines that had once mocked Seo-jin were changing. The board had released a statement confirming that she would remain in the succession process. But there was another announcement. Hanseong Atelier had partnered with several independent Korean filmmakers to create a new cultural campaign. And Min-jae's documentary studio had been selected to lead it. When Seo-jin saw the announcement, she immediately knew what her father had done. He hadn't given Min-jae a gift. He had given him an opportunity. One that Min-jae could earn on his own. That afternoon, Seo-jin visited Min-jae's studio in Mapo. The place looked completely different from the first time she had seen it. There were people everywhere. Editors. Cameramen. Designers. Stacks of equipment. Laughter. Energy. Life. Min-jae found her standing near the entrance. He smiled. You came. She looked around. You have a real studio now. He laughed. Apparently, I do. She stepped closer. Are you happy? He looked at her. Very. She smiled. Because of the project. He shook his head. Not entirely. She understood. They walked through the studio together. For the first time, Seo-jin saw his world without pretending to belong in it. And Min-jae saw hers without feeling like an outsider. They were different. Their lives were different. Their ambitions were different. But somehow, they fit. That evening, they walked along the Han River. No security. No photographers. No expensive cars. Just the two of them. Seo-jin stopped beside the railing. Do you remember the first night we met? Min-jae laughed. You offered me money to pretend to love you. She smiled. And you almost walked away. I should have. Why didn't you? He looked at her. Because sometimes the wrong door leads you to the right life. She leaned against his shoulder. The city lights reflected across the river. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. But for the first time, they weren't afraid of it. Because whatever happened next, they would face it honestly. Together, 6 months passed. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy Seo-jin's future had become a distant memory. Hanseong Atelier was thriving. Seo-jin had earned her place on the board, not because she was her father's daughter, but because she had proven she could lead. Across Seoul, Min-jae's documentary studio was growing too. His first major project had been released internationally. The film won an award for cultural storytelling. For the first time in years, he wasn't fighting simply to survive. But success brought something neither of them had expected. Distance. Seo-jin's schedule became relentless. International meetings, fashion shows, investor dinners, business trips. Min-jae's studio demanded long hours too. Editing sessions often stretched into the early morning. They began missing dinners, then weekends, then entire days together. Nothing dramatic happened. No betrayal. No secret lover. No terrible argument. Just two people slowly becoming busy enough to forget how much they needed each other. One evening, Seo-jin returned home after midnight. The apartment was dark. She found Min-jae asleep on the sofa, still wearing the clothes he had worked in all day. Beside him was a cold dinner he had prepared for both of them. She stood there silently. Suddenly, she remembered the beginning. The contract. The fake dates. The first time he had walked into her world. And the promise they had never actually spoken aloud. Never become strangers again. She gently covered him with a blanket. But as she turned away, Min-jae opened his eyes. "You just got home." She nodded. "Yes." He looked at the untouched dinner. "I waited." Guilt crossed her face. "I'm sorry." He sat up. "I know you're busy. And you're not." He smiled sadly. "That's not the point." The room became quiet. Seo-jin finally understood. They had spent months fighting to build successful lives. And were now in danger of losing the life they had built together. She sat beside him. "What do we do?" Min-jae looked at her. "Maybe we stop trying to fit our relationship into whatever time is left." He took her hand. "Maybe we start making time for it." Seo-jin squeezed his fingers. For once, there was no grand gesture. No billionaire. No contract. No audience. Just two people deciding that love deserved a place on their calendars too. And that decision would change everything again. 3 weeks later, Min-jae received an invitation that could change his career forever. A major international streaming company wanted to finance his next documentary series. The project would require him to spend nearly 6 months traveling through Europe and Asia. It was everything he had once dreamed of. But when he read the final page, his excitement disappeared. The production would begin in less than a month. Seo-jin was scheduled to launch Hanseong Atelier's biggest international collection yet during the same period. For the first time, their dreams were pulling them in opposite directions. That evening, they sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant in Itaewon. The invitation lay between them. Seo-jin read it carefully. Then smiled. "You should take it." Min-jae looked at her. "Just like that." "Why not?" "Because you'll be busy too." She lowered her eyes. "I'll manage." He knew that answer. It was the same answer she had given every time she was afraid to admit something hurt. "Seo-jin, I'm happy for you. But are you?" She didn't respond. The silence answered for her. Min-jae reached across the table. "I don't want us to become two people who love each other from different time zones." Her eyes became glossy. "Neither do I." For several minutes, they simply sat there. Then Seo-jin said something neither expected. Go. Min-jae stared at her. Go and make the film you've always wanted to make. She smiled through her tears. And I'll build the company I've always wanted to build. He squeezed her hand. But we'll do something differently this time. What? We'll stop assuming love means giving up our dreams. Seo-jin smiled. Instead of choosing between them, they chose to make room for both. Over the following weeks, they created a simple ritual. Every night, no matter where they were, they would call. No business. No work. No pretending everything was fine. Just 20 minutes belonging entirely to them. And when Min-jae finally left Seoul, Seo-jin stood at the airport watching his plane disappear beyond the clouds. It hurt. But it wasn't the same kind of pain she had once feared. This time, she wasn't losing him. She was trusting him. And sometimes, that is the hardest form of love. The first month apart was surprisingly easy. They called every night. Min-jae sent Seo-jin photographs from every city he visited. She sent him pictures of the meals she ate alone after long meetings. They laughed. They complained. They missed each other. But they stayed connected. Then the calls became shorter. Min-jae's production schedule became chaotic. Seo-jin's international launch moved forward unexpectedly. Some nights, they only exchanged messages. Then one evening, Seo-jin called 3 times. No answer. She tried again. Nothing. Hours later, Min-jae finally called. His voice sounded exhausted. I'm sorry. Seo-jin tried to smile. It's okay. But it wasn't. She could hear another voice in the background. A woman's voice. Seo-jin's expression changed. Who is that? Min-jae paused. It's one of the producers. She nodded. Okay. But something inside her had shifted. Not because she believed he was cheating. She trusted him. What frightened her was something else. She suddenly realized how little she knew about his life now. His world was moving forward without her. And hers was doing the same. 2 weeks later, Min-jae's documentary team released the first promotional images. The photographs were beautiful. One particular image caught Seo-jin's attention. Min-jae was standing beside a woman from his production team. They were laughing. The photograph looked intimate. The internet immediately began speculating about them. Seo-jin stared at the comments. She knew better than to believe strangers. But loneliness has a way of turning small doubts into enormous fears. She closed her phone that same night. Min-jae called. She answered. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, he asked, Are you okay? Seo-jin wanted to say yes. Instead, she whispered, I'm scared we're becoming strangers. Silence. Then Min-jae said something that broke her heart. I'm scared too. Neither blamed the other. Neither shouted. They simply admitted the truth. Love had survived the contract. It had survived the scandal. It had survived distance. But now, they had to discover whether it could survive 2 people growing into lives they had once dreamed of. And neither knew the answer. 3 months later, Seo-jin stood backstage at Hanseong Atelier's biggest international fashion showcase. Hundreds of guests filled the venue. International buyers, journalists, investors, fashion editors. Everything she had worked for was finally happening. But there was one empty seat in the front row. The seat she kept looking toward. Min-jae had promised he would try to return. But his documentary production had been delayed. Seo-jin told herself she understood. Then the lights dimmed. The music began. She stepped onto the runway. For the next 20 minutes. She was perfect. Confident. Elegant. Untouchable. The collection received a standing ovation. But when Seo-jin returned backstage, She felt strangely empty. Her assistant approached her. "There is someone waiting for you." Seo-jin turned and froze. Min-jae stood at the entrance. He looked exhausted. His hair was slightly messy. His coat was wrinkled from traveling. But he was smiling. Seo-jin didn't move. Neither did he. Then she ran toward him. He caught her in his arms. She held him tightly. For several seconds. Neither spoke. Min-jae finally whispered, "I came back." Seo-jin laughed through her tears. "I can see that." He smiled. "I missed too many important moments." She shook her head. "No." She touched his face. "You came back for this one." He looked into her eyes. "And I'll keep coming back." She smiled. The relationship that had begun as a transaction had survived something neither of them expected. Distance. Success. Fear. Doubt. And the temptation to choose easier lives. Later that night, they walked through the quiet streets of Seoul. No photographers followed them. No cameras flashed. No one cared who they were. They were simply Seo-jin and Min-jae. Two people who had once agreed to pretend. Two people who eventually discovered that the most valuable things in life cannot be purchased. Seo-jin stopped beneath a streetlight. "Do you remember the contract?" Min-jae laughed. "I wish I could forget it." She smiled. "I don't." "Why?" "Because without it." She looked at him. "I might never have met you." Min-jae took her hand. "Then maybe it wasn't the beginning of our lie." He smiled. "Maybe it was the beginning of our truth." They continued walking together. And behind them, Seoul continued glowing. The city that had once taught Seo-jin that appearances mattered more than feelings had finally taught her something else. The right person doesn't make you choose between who you are and who you want to become. They make you brave enough to become both.